Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to today's Art Matters talk with artists Sarah Higgins and Gordon Lyon. My name is Corey Fry. I'm the exhibitions manager here at the Delaplaine. We have several exhibitions going on here at the Delaplaine, and you're welcome to come out and visit. We're open Monday through Saturday from 9 to 5, and on Sundays we're open from 11 to 5. So come and check things out. We have three solo exhibitions, three solo artist exhibitions, two of which are our guests today, Sarah and Gordon, and a third solo artist, Gil Garcia, who's on our second floor, one of our second floor galleries. And then in our main galleries, we have the Over 70 show, which is an open call for anyone that's over the age of 70 years old can submit one piece of artwork. And we've got a great show of I think it's over 120 pieces of artwork. So it's a great show. So all that said, come out, check things out here in our galleries. If you're at a distance and you can't check it out, you can go to our website, and there's links to our Flickr page, which have some virtual overviews of all the exhibitions, and you can see those. Some of the other things available on our website and in our magazine that we sent out, if you receive those, we have our fall magazine that's about to come out, and fall registration for classes is opening. You can see all the classes and workshops and various programs that we offer here at the Delaplaine. And our website is delaplaine.org. And you can check that out. So there's lots of good things to look forward to in the future. We've got some great exhibitions coming up in the next couple months. And we've got some great talks and things on our YouTube channel, which you can access through our website as well. Okay. Without further ado, I want to go ahead and jump into our talks today. Our first speaker is Sarah Higgins. So Sarah Higgins has been in the art field for the last 50 years. She's been an oil painter and a watercolor painter, a graphic designer, a ceramic artist, an arts administrator. She actually was an arts administrator here at the Delaplaine a few years back. And now she's her solo exhibition here at the Delaplaine is all abstract paintings done in acrylic. And it's a great show. I really encourage you to come out and check it out if you haven't had the chance to. But Sarah, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
I'm very happy to be here, and sort of, I call the Delaplaine my alma mater. As Corey said, I've been doing this a while, and actually I probably was doing it since I was 4 years old, but some form of art. But on the screen right now, I kind of want to go to my title, and it's Circling the Past. So you will see a piece of ceramics that I did probably 40 years ago, and you will see a piece of work that's currently in this show. And there are a lot of similarities. So it's, what goes around comes around. And that's sort of how I'm going to present my talk. Okay. In this, I did at the Portland School of Art, which is now Maine College of Art. And it was a 4-year art school. We had the most academic course we had was art history, and I had about 4 semesters of that. But this is, well, it's kind of funny. It's the reason I skipped class. My whole class skipped class. And so the teacher decided they were going to give us punishment by taking a drawing that we had done in a drawing class and turn it into a painting. So I had a lot of fun with this. And afterwards, the teacher said, well, maybe you should skip class more often, which would have been fun. but that is still a sort of similarity to where I am now with line, form, and it's just, I really find myself going back to my old classes in design, which was my very favorite. And then it sort of moved away from Maine, and actually this started when I moved to Maryland with my ceramics. Kind of started out with the raku, which I didn't like brown pottery. I liked color. So raku gave me that chance to go to color. And I went into earthenware, which was low fired. And there again, I could add more color, more pattern, sculpture forms. I think I did the most with the combined wheel and slab work. That actually got into several shows, and I actually sold. And so it was kind of nice. And then I started doing more paintings on ceramics, although this is a 3-inch deep slab bowl. And that really, when I saw this, I said, why don't you just get back into painting, and then, it'll be easier. You won't have to lift clay boxes, safer. So I took a class from Lisa Cook at the Delaplaine Center after I retired for still lifes. I just wanted to kind of get back into painting a little bit, and also I had never worked with acrylics, and I had developed a kind of an allergy to oils. So I kind of had fun and games. I started painting little, they're small, they're like 5 inches square. Toys that my children had, games that we had, and it was a lot of fun. And I kind of stopped painting when people started asking me to do their toys. Sort of my honoriness coming through. This is my transition to abstract. These are some of the first work I did. This is actually the first work I did that I showed, and probably the second, and so on, which shows that I started doing line work, and I was going to bring out a brush. I have a brush that I had made for ceramics out of the tail, or some of the tail feathers of my golden retriever. That was probably 50 years ago, and I'm still using it today. That gives some of these really free lines that you see in here. Let's see. So some of these arrows. I'm trying to get my pen. Okay, you can see these lines. That's all done fine, but very hard to control brush. So I just kind of flick it around, and then I work. I start out in a very spontaneous way, and then I start planning shapes, forms, colors, and with a fairly strong design background. This is the fun part. This is solving problems, and what looks like maybe I did in 5 minutes, no, it wasn't done in 5 minutes. Takes a while. It takes a long time to be spontaneous. Okay, this is actually the current show. So those of you who can't get to the show, and I do know there's several of my relatives who are watching this, and they are in faraway places. So, this happens to be my favorite one on the show today. Doesn't mean it will be tomorrow. And that is called One Man Out. And the reason for the title is you see these squares, and then you see this one little circle. So that is my odd man out. And this is my pottery comes into some of this. There's a vase form here, so a pink vase. And this, I just like the shapes and the flow, color. definitely into color. And some of the pieces, I didn't get not slides, photos of all my pieces, which I regret now. Um, but you get, well, you can see the line work, it's still there. Some a little bit more than others in color and pattern. And sometimes I think it's busy, but I like it. Or I'm happy with it at this point.
That's
Well,
great, Sarah. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed seeing some of your old work, and some of the ways that that's tied into your new work. And I've got a few questions I'd like to ask you, but we'll save that for the question and answer time here at the end. So I want to introduce our second artist today. This is Gordon Lyon. Computer scientist turned visual artist, Gordon Lyon acquired a solid foundation in art at Montgomery College. He initially planned to paint, but sculpture proved irresistible to him. His works are usually in wood or welded steel, and Lyon's associations include the Washington Sculptures Group, the Montgomery Arts Association, the Delaplaine Visual Arts Center here, the Maryland Federation of Art, and the International Sculpture Center. Gordon, thank you so much for being with us and taking time to be with us today.
Yeah, it's good to be here. In my show, in the Delaplaine, which is running as it indicates on this first frame, I have a number of different works. Some of them are volumes out of wood, others are assembled out of pieces of steel. There's one type that I do, of which the torso, which we see on the right here, seems to generate questions. People ask me, how much does that casting weigh? It's not a casting. It's basically a very fancy empty tin can. It's completely hollow inside. And what I'm going to do is show the analogies that working with sheet steel has to working with paper. And that's how the patterns are developed for works such as this torso there on the right. So by the time I'm done with a few frames, you'll have sort of an idea of how you might try it yourself, just using Bristol board and a ballpoint pen and a little bit of tape or glue. So as I said, it depends on using a stiff paper, and the construction is limited to cutting, folding, and gluing. And these have analogous properties. The Bristol board or the filing cards are like sheet metal, and the gluing or taping is very analogous to welding. And that's what makes the process work. So here's the first example. We take a 3x5 card and we score using a good ballpoint pen, not a felt tip. It has to be a real ballpoint pen so it can make an indented line in the paper. So you score, say, a graceful arc as I've done there. Step 2, you fold carefully along the scored line so that it begins to generate very pleasant surfaces and edges. As you can see, it's you might think it's part of a wave breaking. I've actually done waves. You could imagine it being a leaf of some sort. Three, you trim it up to whatever you have in mind. In this case, I've trimmed it to what we'll see is going to be a leaf. You get a pattern when you do that, because when you squash it flat, you can put it on a Xerox machine and crank the size up, say, print it in 3 times as large as you've made it. And now you have a pattern that you can transfer to sheet steel. And the gauge of steel that you want is not too thick because it's hard to bend, and not too thin. You don't want 22 gauge or 24 gauge because it'll be floppy like the steel equivalent of tissue paper. So maybe 18 gauge sheet steel or 20 gauge. And you transfer your enlarged pattern to that steel, and this is what you would get. Here, I transferred it to 16 gauge, which is a little heavy, but I just happened to have it lying around in the shop. And then after that, you can mount it anyway, and you get yourself sort of a minimalist piece of sculpture in steel. Okay, that was level 1. Next, we do the same sort of scoring on the paper. On here, 3x5 cards. By the way, I use 3x5 cards because sometimes when traveling, you can, like on an airplane, you can do this, take out your little cards, have a little folding scissors, and a bit of Scotch tape, and you can sit for a couple hours amusing yourself making test patterns. So we want a symmetric set of scoring. So you might make the scoring line a separate sheet, as I've done near the bottom, the white one, and then trace it pushing hard onto a second card. Then fold carefully again, so you get a symmetric set of folds that reflect each other. And you can see how it's taking shape. Now, in this case, what I've done is I'll call them wings. The open part that you folded back, we trim them to a nice shape and glue them. And you've got yourself a little piece of sculpture that can stand with no base. Now, remember I said you transfer this pattern, if you want it in steel, you transfer it to a Xerox machine, and then you choose a level of enlargement. So when you do that, this is what the result might look like. In this case, it's been enlarged quite a bit to a height of about 33 inches. And the wings are folded back, and of course you don't glue them, you weld them. And if you notice on the inset in the upper left, there's a little inset photo. And the piece looking at the back of it has a silvery part. That's an extra surface that was welded on to fill up the gap that was in there. It's starting to get a little complicated now. And the next level will show you what it takes to get to torso. So here's level 3, the torso work at Delaplaine. And she's, I would guess 22 inches high and made of, I think, 20 gauge steel. But you can see her surface is more complex. Still, we can handle it using the paper technique. So here's the pattern. You do the same cutting and folding, only now you're adding more fill-in areas. But you can see, if you look up near the top of this, where the collarbone is, there's a fold, and that defines and actually strengthens the surface up there. You're introducing cuts. If you come like a quarter of the way down, it's been cut, and the upper part of the breasts have been gently folded out. Then it's been pulled back the way the previous work was, so that The torso has a gentle bend to it, while it also has sort of a wasp waist. And then down near the bottom, there are cutouts where the legs would attach. Of course, there aren't any, but we have to fill it in, and there's an added surface that later that will be a pattern and you will weld something there. But that's the final complication. And the time it takes, by the time you reach this level, these are beginning to take like a whole work week to do. So the next frame shows the steps all combined. The first thing you do is enlarge the main pattern, which I was just showing you in the previous frame. We can look at it one more time here. There it is. And that's been enlarged. And now we've turned it around so it's facing in the other direction. And the shoulder blades have been bent back carefully. And after it's been transferred to steel and cut out. The crucial point now will be when you fold the back part of that pattern, and on this frame you'll see there are a little dotted line at the bottom, and that's a weld. The first weld that you make, and that determines quite a bit of what the final work is going to look like. If you make that angle acute, then the hips and the general structure take on one shape. If you make it more of a flat butt welds, then the hips widen out, and the steel, once you weld it, begins to stiffen up. The other surfaces are taken directly off the pattern at this point. You don't need the Xerox machine. You just press paper. Say, let's consider the back surface. Up at the top it says back surface welded. The first thing you do is take a large sheet of paper and press it along the edges so you essentially trace the outline, and you cut it out in steel, and then you carefully tack it on to make sure everything is lined up correctly. Once you have it tacked, and if it doesn't fit, you can cut the tacks with a right angle grinder and readjust the pattern fit. But once you weld it into place, as it is here, then you can begin fitting. You notice it says other added surfaces, like underneath the fold outs where the breasts were or where the legs might have come out, you want to blank those in. And so that's the main structural point. Then comes what happens to be one of the most tedious parts of the whole thing, and that is you have to grind these edges smooth. And that takes a while. It is the one least fun part of the whole process. It throws metallic smelling dust everywhere. And if you make a mistake, you get a hole, which you have to patch with welding, and then it's hard to grind. So it takes a while. But the end result is what you see here, going from paper pattern to essentially steel work. The paper is cheap. It behaves much like the steel does. And the patterns require, if you don't do it carefully, very little extra work.
Thank you, Gordon. I really appreciate you taking the time to just walk us through your process. That's fantastic. I've got a couple of questions for both of you, but it also looks like we have a couple of questions from viewers. The first question that came through was from an anonymous, well, they're actually from an anonymous attendee, and there's one for Sarah and one for you, Gordon. Sarah, they asked, how do you determine your color compositions? Do you have a favorite color that you love to use more than others?
Uh, I use terracotta color a lot, and you know where that comes from my pottery. Uh, and lately I've been using a lot of pinks, but I do kind of go with I go with the color wheel to a certain amount. I want to have complement colors, and so there will be shades of yellow and shades of red and shades of blue,
Mm-hmm.
as well as pops of orange and purple and green.
Yeah, but you say terracotta is one of your favorite colors for go-to colors?
Yeah, it's clay. I go back to
Yeah.
that.
Oh, I love that you tie those things in together so much. That's fantastic. Um, okay, so Gordon, again from an anonymous attendee, they asked, how do you finish your pieces? Do you powder coat them with color?
No, the gauge of the steel is really too light to use powder coating. They would melt down.
Okay.
So you have a couple options. Um, Typically, what I do is I grind down all the edges to get them like I like, and then I spray them with auto body primer. And you can sometimes, if you find a pit in your weld, you can use auto body putty to patch the weld at the same time you're doing this.
Mm.
And you sort of smooth the shape down, usually in a light gray or oxide red. And then I tend to just use spray cans of Rust-Oleum. Krylon gives a nice selection of colors, but Krylon dries more slowly. And where I lived before, I moved just recently to a retirement place, my wife and I. Where I was before, I had a painting hood, so I could use all sorts of different paints. But here, I would stick to something fast drying like Rust-Oleum.
Hmm.
And sometimes you can clear coat it. If you can see the yellow piece in the background, where I'm talking here,
Yeah.
up on the shelf, there's a clear section between yellow with a clear section that's been polished with very fine, 11000 sandpaper, and then clear coated. And Rust-Oleum clear coat works well for that.
Hmm.
That's the one exception would be in one of the pieces in the show, I have a thing called a gourd, and the inside of the gourd is sort of strange plant-like inside. And what that is it has on the steel, it has a Rust-Oleum high grip primer. When you spray it on, it's almost like you sprayed it mixed with sand. It's so rough. And then I used golden fiber acrylic paste mixed with golden red oxide acrylic and a palette knife and a big floppy brush. So you can switch to more artistic materials if you want that effect.
Yeah. No, that's great. While you're up on the screen, Gordon, I wanted to ask you if you could say anything about so the theme of your exhibition here at the Delaplaine is a moving towards abstraction. from
Right.
representation and even utilitarian objects towards abstraction. I wonder if you could say just a little bit about that. Why does that seem important to you? What are you exploring in doing that sort of thing?
Well, unfortunately, I I think it's an obsession. Um, when I first started college, I was in science, of course, but I was still interested in art. And so this would be about 1960. Um, there was an article, I think, in the Atlantic magazine where they showed some of the Spanish painters, Tapias, and oh, there may have been an Italian, Burra. Does that ring a bell?
Hmm.
And Burri, something like that. And I became fascinated on how you moved from representation to abstraction. And then, of course, there was a little paperback that came out around the same time that covered European painting. Uh, the informalist, the informal meaning not quite formed or something like that. So it just set me off. I did some realistic painting in high school, learning how to handle oils. But then I switched to acrylics when I was in graduate school, and they were all abstract.
Okay.
And so I'm kind of fascinated about when you start with a realistic thing and you ask several people what are they seeing, they all answer pretty much the same. And when you have something that's very abstract, like, say, one of Sarah's works there, and you show it to, say, a selection of 40 people, you may get 40 different answers.
Huh.
Oh, it was the dream I had last night. No, it's the interstate outside California
Yeah.
route something or other in rush hour. And it goes up sort of non-linear. By the time you get to be abstract, it's far more uncertainty than when you were doing realistic things.
Hmm.
And so I like to kind of sometimes see where the tripping point is, where you kind of pass into getting wild numbers of responses.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps or not.
No.
One of my most satisfying works once was that I did an abstract version of, well, you know, the torso that I just talked about.
Yeah.
Well, it was a woman lying down, like on the beach. And it had been stylized, I thought, so it still looked like a torso. I called it the Polynesian. And I was talking with a young artist friend of mine, and she said, oh, I like the way the shoulders are. But she was pointing to what I had thought were actually the truncated legs.
Okay. Yeah.
So even though we could agree on what it was, we couldn't agree on what direction it was pointing in.
Yeah.
That was one of my more interesting ones.
Huh. No, that's a great story. No, I think I really appreciate that answer. It's a matter of curiosity for you. And I like that you said that little anecdote at the end was a satisfying story
Yeah.
to you. So it reveals how your curiosity is being met by someone else's perception. And so that's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, well, since I learned long ago, and you know, if you read research papers on this, they tell you the same thing. The artist does what they think they're doing,
Yeah.
but the viewer, of course, comes from a completely different context, and
Yeah.
and they see what they think they want to or are going to see. Whether or not there's much agreement on this is amusing sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that's interesting to me, and this, goes for your work as well, Sarah, is that it's more of a collaborative effort between the artist and the viewer. You're both providing information that lends itself towards the meaning of the work, and that's always something that's really interesting to me. Um, you're leaving things open ended enough that the viewer brings their perception, their history, their idiosyncrasies, and associations to the work. And that's, yeah, the collaborative effort there is really interesting to me. Sarah, I wanted to ask you, you know, you've, because of this jump between ceramic work towards painting, I mean, one of the things that I notice about your paintings is that, well, let me back up here. So with being a ceramic artist, you're making things with your hand, but being a painter, you're sort of distanced from the actual material by the tool, so the brush. But in a lot of your work, I see that you close that gap a little more. Like there's so much texture involved. And I wanted to ask you about other tools that you are you using other tools rather than just brushes when you make your work? And is the fact that your paintings are more like they lend themselves towards a tactile, the tactility of your work reminds me of sculptural work. It reminds me of ceramic work. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. And
Okay.
and the texture is this show actually shows more of my paintings that are textured. What I have on my easel now has even more texture.
Huh.
And I definitely I miss pottery. And I actually called up the pottery school in Frederick and was going to take a class. And I kind of thought, well, my back is shot. I can't lift anything more than 20 pounds. That maybe not. But, so it keeps being in my mind that I want to get back to some three-dimension. Third dimension, 3D. It's something I really miss.
Yeah. What other are you? Do you use other tools when you're painting other than just brushes?
I use some of my pottery tools.
Oh, that is fantastic. Yeah.
Scratchy tool, and I got some sculptures tools. Plus, I use crumpled up paper, and different papers will give different textures.
Yeah.
So, but no, I'm not giving away my pottery tools.
No, I love that. I love that you're sort of carrying your pottery tools over into your painting work. That's great. That's great. You said too that you said it takes a long time to be spontaneous. And do you feel like that's something that well, that sort of implies that it's something that you've had to learn over time, but is it something for you, is it something that became more difficult? Does that necessarily mean that it's harder to be spontaneous?
Well, I also think of Picasso saying that it took a lifetime to be able to draw like a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
It kind of goes along with that a little bit. And plus, that, there's some spontaneous, there is kind of a trend towards sometimes the spontaneous work. But I don't always feel they understand the design behind doing the painting or the composition. And that's when I start the work, because I really call it a problem solving, is to get, you don't want your eye to go over and never focus, and you don't want to be, dead center and not look around. So the goal is to let people see the whole canvas and sort of what I mean in terms that I still want it to look spontaneous, but now I've got all these other problems to solve.
Sure. Yeah. Gordon, I'm curious about spontaneity in your work. It seems with maybe at the design, is it right that at the design, like the initial design stage of making your work, maybe there's some spontaneity there, but it seems like with the technical precision and some of the difficulty of the tools, as the work progresses, you distance yourself from spontaneity, or am I just reading that into it?
No, with the technique that I just described to you, you're quite right. Um, you you have to be thinking on the piece on, because you're especially when you're folding, you know, because one surface is affecting another surface and both of them are drawing this or making this edge in space. You may find that it's beginning to irritate you that you can't get to where you want to go.
Mm.
And I don't use this folding technique very much anymore. I just cut so I can cut what I want.
Yeah.
And but there have been some interesting results that I've had when I've cut out a pattern and then looked at the residue lying on the floor that may curl up like some strange pretzel. And I found myself fiddling with the negative image, the cutoff on the floor.
Huh.
After I worked on the main piece for a couple hours, I fiddled with the one on the floor, and some of those have been a great success. In the show, the piece that looks like a little tropical flower, I think it's called Tropical Bloom,
Yeah.
originated because there it was a square piece of steel and something was cut out of the middle of it. And then I began twisting it and fiddling with it, and the little tropical bloom, which in its initial form took one quick little weld, was the result. Now, the one you see in the show is a little more complicated. I adjusted the surfaces, and it has 3 rather delicate welds. But that's something that fell on the floor that got reworked.
Gotcha.
You know, Sarah mentioned something very interesting. I heard a lovely talk about 3 or 4 years ago at a conference. Someone talking about Franz Klein. You remember some of his works that were like black lines on a
I love his work, by the way. And
huh?
I keep looking at that and going,
Yeah. So they were looking into how he did that, and initially, apparently he took like photographs of a chair, and it was just when Xerox machines were coming in. So he took photographs of a chair, and then he enlarged them on a Xerox machine and cut out views of them. And then he, took his canvases, painted them white, and then slopped the black lines on them. Okay, that's the easy part. They look like they were just knocked off that way. The old thing, my 7-year-old kid can do that.
Yeah.
No, the 7-year-old kid can do up to where we are now. Then he went out, he had done an analysis of the surfaces of these paintings. Apparently, Klein would spend hours with the white paint kind of snowpaking out parts of the black paint and rebalancing, and then add a little of the black, and then a little of the, it went on and on and on. And when he was done, you'd say, holy cow, how did he turn that thing out so beautiful in one big splash?
Yeah.
He didn't. It was just what Sarah said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, Sarah, sorry, go ahead, Gordon.
Well, I mean, she was onto a real truth, and that is that Picasso and some Klein and those guys may have made it look like child's play, but without the training, most of them are going to be absolute hodgepodges.
Yeah, I think you said it, Sarah. You said, sometimes you'll get reactions from the work that it looks like it happened very quickly, but it actually was there's quite a time duration in each painting's process.
Yeah, I credit my design teacher an awful lot for my work now.
Yeah. Well, I don't see any other questions that have come through. Do either of you have any final thoughts you wanted to share with anybody before we close things out?
Well, in looking at it just dawned on me here, some of the pictures that Sarah had, and she was talking about them deriving from pottery. When I was, a freshman in college, I had to take this course called projective geometry. And what you had to do was they gave you challenges and you had to come up. This was an engineering college, so you had to come up with front view, side view, top view, et cetera, et cetera. And it went through my mind that some of Sarah's looked like you had stuck the ceramic work and done projections onto some plane. I don't know if that's what Sarah, were you thinking of that when you did them?
Well, it's funny. My best class in high school was geometry.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And yeah, but when I'm working, I'm working. I don't even think
Right.
other than just that painting and how to make it work. I mean, it definitely the fairly decent math student and liking design and all that. And I grew up on a farm, so I always had little things to work with. Like there was a tool where I wasn't supposed to use that because I was in that room. Yeah, my sisters and I had a good time doing it.
No, I think that's great that those things translate over sort of whether we like them to or not in a lot of ways. Like you being good in geometry at school lends you to making geometric work in some ways, which without you having to think about even doing it. That's sort of the inner psyche of the artist is a really interesting thing in that way. Yeah, there's things you can't get away from for sure.
Right, no.
Yeah. All right. Well,
I wanted to say to Gordon that
yeah.
After this week, when I get done all this stuff, I'm going to get the cardboard out and work and just play around with three-dimensional shapes again.
Yeah, I can just mention, if you look at I have some shelves in back here. I have a couple books on papercraft.
I have them too.
Elementary.
Yeah.
Don't get the origami for 2020 or something. I buy them used on the internet. Library clearance. You can get them for $3-4 from the 60s and 70s, and you usually only use the real simple things, but they can really be inspiring.
Right.
Well, Sarah and Gordon, thank you very much for taking time to share some of your process and some of your work with us. Really appreciate it. It's really fascinating to hear both of you talk about your work and where you came from and where your curiosity lies. So thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah.
One more question here.
Oh yeah, hold on. Let's see. Yes, Lisa said, she said, I was thinking that you could combine Gordon's paper folding with some of your painting, 3D art like ceramics.
Yes, that the thing that I mentioned about spraying the steel with a very rough primer, and then using golden acrylic pastes and stuff like that. That's how I would recommend you, if you want to try it. That's how you can
Yeah.
do it. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And Lisa said, thank you, Gordon and Sally. Oh, and the host didn't catch her name. My name's Corey. She said that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us. Thank you, everybody that took the time to watch, and everybody that takes the time, you know, once we get this posted on our YouTube channel. And again, Gordon and Sarah, thank you both very much for taking the time with us. We're starting registration for classes, so it's worth checking out our website, seeing where you can get some information there. And if you come in to see us, check out the exhibitions, and you can grab one of our catalogs that has future exhibitions and has all of the classes that we have coming up. And we want to encourage you, if you're interested in becoming a member here at the Delaplaine, there's a lot of discounts on classes and a lot of great perks for becoming a member. So you can check that out. You can find out more information from our website or coming in. And thank you all for watching. Thanks again, Sarah, and thank you, Gordon.
Yeah.
Thank you, Corey.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You're welcome. All right, we'll see y'all later.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.